What is up, guys? Delboy here. So I'm making a quick prediction video for the fight between Gerald Washington and Jarrell Miller. This fight takes place on the 29th of July. It's going down on the undercard of Adrian Broner versus Mikey Garcia. It's a heavyweight contest. I believe this fight is scheduled for 10 rounds, and it's a really interesting fight. You know, the winner of this fight will get pushed into title contention, and the loser will have to start again, kind of thing. Interesting fight, stylistically a good fight, and I think at both stages of their careers, I think it's probably the right fight to make. Actually, it's a really good fight and an intriguing one. Let's talk about both fighters briefly. Gerald Washington, he comes into this fight with a record of 18 wins, 1 defeat, 1 draw, 12 of those 18 wins coming by way of knockout. Jarrell Miller, he comes into this fight with a record of 18 wins, 0 defeats, 1 draw, 16 of those 18 wins coming by way of knockout. So Jarrell Miller is undefeated. If we look at the physical attributes of both guys, Gerald Washington is 6'6", with a reach of 82 inches. Jarrell Miller is 6'4", with a reach of 78 inches. So Gerald Washington has a 4-inch reach advantage in this fight, and stylistically that's definitely going to play into his hands, because ultimately we've seen both guys fight. Gerald Washington is a guy who likes to get on his bike and pop that jab, make the most of those long arms. He'll use that jab, he'll use his legs, and he'll use that right hand whenever it's available. He'll never really overcommit with it. He'll never get gung-ho. He'll only use that right hand when he feels comfortable. Other than that, he's quite defensive. He likes to move on the back foot and use that jab and pick up points and play almost tip-tap boxing. And he is quite a good boxer at the heavyweight division. So stylistically, we know how Gerald is going to approach this fight. We saw him against Wilder do the same thing. We saw him against Amir Mansour do that. We saw him against Eddie Chambers do that. All 3 fights, he fought the same way. Jab, back foot, right hand. And that's the way he's going to approach this fight, you'd imagine. Jarrell Miller, to me, is a guy... I've seen a few of his fights. I've seen a few highlights. To me, he's a guy who is best on the inside or at mid-range. I think Jarrell Miller, one thing he does very well, and it's something not many heavyweights do, is work the body. He's excellent at working the body, and what I like about Jarrell Miller, he works the body and he'll change levels. So he might start at the head and come down to the body. He'll start at the body, come up to the head, etc., etc. You know, he's quite creative on the inside and at mid-range. And I've seen also he's got some sneaky uppercuts on the inside. So we know Gerald Washington, although he likes to box on the back foot, when somebody gets too close, he likes to clinch. And to me, when I was training a bit in boxing, my trainer always said, if someone's coming in for a clinch, try and land an uppercut. You know, that's a punch to use if someone does try to come in to clinch. And Miller has a very good uppercut on the inside. So I can definitely see where both guys have their success. I mean, it's a tough fight to call stylistically, because I think, obviously, one reservation I have about Jarrell Miller is his gas tank. And Gerald Washington has the perfect style to see what his gas tank is like, because, you know, he might be able to mess Jarrell Miller around for a few rounds in terms of like popping that jab, moving on the back foot, making himself a hard target, don't give too much away, and drag him into the deeper rounds. If he does that, it'll be interesting to see what Jarrell Miller is like at chasing a fight, or what he's like in the deep rounds, kind of thing. We've not really seen that, you know. And he's a big guy, Jarrell Miller. He's 6'4", like I said, and I believe he's weighed as high as 300 pounds in some fights. Now, he doesn't look fat. He carries a weight very well, but it's still a lot of weight to be carrying around when you're chasing the fight, you know. If Washington can box on the back foot like he does and have success, win rounds, make it a close fight, it'll be interesting to see what Jarrell does in the sort of last few rounds. That's one reservation I have about Jarrell Miller. And also, another reservation I have about Jarrell Miller, although I think he's a very good inside fighter, I think he's good at mid-range. I question whether he can sort of box at range with Gerald Washington. So if there's rounds where it's strictly at range, then you'd have to imagine, well, I'd have to imagine that Jarrell's going to come off second best against Washington. So he needs to find a way to get up close in this fight. And again, that's the way you got to beat a guy like Gerald Washington, a guy who's fighting on his back foot, using his legs. You need to get up close. You need to work the body. And that's what he needs to do. He needs to make it a rough fight, because when Washington boxes, he can have success. We saw that against Eddie Chambers, where he pretty much shut him out. You know, Chambers just let him box on the back foot. He didn't really put up a fight. And Washington had it all his own way. He just coasted to a points victory. But if you switch back to the Mansour fight, Washington, when he boxed at range, he looked quite good. He was winning rounds. But every time Mansour got close, to me, he looked uncomfortable. You know, he never really fought fire with fire. And even against Wilder, when he boxed, he was outpointing Wilder. But as soon as Wilder got close, as soon as Wilder started to put the heat on, as soon as Wilder clipped him, that was it. You know, he kind of fell to bits. So I question Washington's ability to get over a crisis kind of thing. And that's one thing Miller needs to force in this fight. He needs to make it a tough fight. He needs to work a body. He needs to make it as rough and tumble as possible. Because I think if he gives Washington confidence and he starts slow, then you know it's going to be a tough fight to chase for Jarrell Miller. You know, a guy who may have stamina issues, a guy who's not really been many rounds at the top level. If he starts poorly, it might be a tough fight to chase. You know, if you give Washington sort of confidence. And stylistically, it's hard to call because I see both guys doing things that trouble the other. You know, I can see a jab and movement troubling Jarrell Miller because I don't think he's great at distance, and I can see Miller's roughhouse inside game and body shots causing Washington problems. I really can, but it's really hard to tell which guy is going to impose their style on the other. One thing I do worry about Jarrell Miller, although he's great on the inside and at mid range. You know, Washington's got relatively quick feet and a long reach. Miller needs quick feet to get on the inside. You know, he needs to take that jab away from Washington. So he needs to have quick feet, and he needs to somehow get rid of that jab. And from what I've seen from Jarrell Miller, his feet are not particularly quick. You know, almost slower. He's almost a little bit flat-footed at times. So I question, if he's losing this fight, let's say he's 3 or 4 rounds down after 5 or something like that, I question what is how he's going to get back into the fight without sort of catching him with a big shot. It's a tough one, it really is. Also, another thing to note that I don't think I've mentioned, out of both fighters, you'd have to say that Jarrell Miller is probably the bigger puncher as well. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of how Washington reacts to Miller's power. I don't think Miller's a one-punch knockout artist really, but he's an accumulative puncher, and he hits hard enough to get your attention. And I'll be interested to see how he takes that power. I don't think Washington's got a bad chin per se, because he took Mansour's best shots. It's more how he deals with that sort of adversity that I have questions about. But yeah, stylistically, this fight is really intriguing, and I'm looking forward to it. I can see this fight going either way. I really can. No matter what outcome, it wouldn't really surprise me. Even a Washington stoppage, it wouldn't surprise me. You know? And that's probably the least likely outcome. But what I think is going to happen in this fight, I think it will be a closely contested fight, but I think the better long-range boxing of Gerald Washington is going to see him through. I think after sort of 4 or 5 rounds, we're going to see Jarrell Miller chasing a fight. And I think he might struggle to claw that back. You know? Just based on what I've seen from him. I don't think his long-range boxing skills, his outside game, is good enough when the rounds are being fought on the outside. I think Washington will have the better of those type of moments. And I think that's going to be the difference in this fight. And also, like I said, Washington has more like he's fought Mansour over 10 rounds. You know, he fought Chambers over 8 rounds. He's got more rounds under his belt against better opposition. You know, He knows the mistakes he made against Deontay Wilder. You know, he's got experience under his belt. He knows what it's like to fight at a certain level, and I think that's going to take him through in this fight. I'm going for the upset. I'm going to go with a Gerald Washington points win, but a close fight to call. I've been back and forth in this one, hence why I've not made this video. I can definitely see Jarrell Miller winning. I can see him getting the stoppage. Whatever happens here won't surprise me, but I'm going to roll the dice. I'm going with a Gerald Washington points win.